I want to call the meeting to order of the Transportation Committee for Monday, 23rd. And the first order of business is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is approved. Next up is approval of the minutes for July 9th, 2018. Is there any changes? Move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. Next up is employee recognition.
Yes, Madam Chair, members, as all of you have known, because you've gone to the Outstanding Operator Brunch in the past, we are truly blessed with many really highly professional operators who bring it every single day. And so it's always a pleasure for me to introduce personally an operator who does that and has done that over the course of his career. So in order for you to meet Richard, I'd like to introduce Christy, who can introduce Richard.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Christy Bailey, Director of Bus Operations, and I'm happy to say that Monica Krueger, Assistant Transportation Manager at Haywood Garage, a 20-year employee, worked in our Transit Information Center, Transit Control Center, and now as an ATM, will introduce Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Madam Chair and council members, I am Monica Krueger. I'm an Assistant Transportation Manager at Haywood Garage, and it is my pleasure today to introduce to you Mr. Richard Bledsoe. It has also been my privilege to serve as his manager for the last few years. Mr. Bledsoe is a full-time bus operator working out of Haywood Garage. He has worked at Metro Transit for 37 years, starting in December of 1980. He routinely does commendable work, meets the challenges of being a bus operator with great success. The quality of his work is reflected in an excellent work record. He has achieved the Elite Master Operator status, which means that he has met the Outstanding Operator criteria 20 times, and the criteria for being named an Outstanding Operator include consistently meeting high attendance standards, having an excellent safety record with no responsible accidents, consistently following operating standards, and providing good customer service. In addition, he has received the Safe Driving Award 37 years. I consistently find him completely pleasant to work with, and his customers do too. One of them recently gave us a commendation that said, "The driver who picked me up and also drove me home is awesome. So friendly, always happy. I appreciate how he does his job and that I always feel safe with him in charge of the transportation." It's the kind of work that Mr. Bledsoe does that allows Metro Transit to provide the quality and the service that's so important to the value of living in this region. So I give you Mr. Richard Bledsoe.
Thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome. You gotta look out for crazy jaywalkers like me.
Richard, congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members, while we're always appreciative of someone who's given their whole career to Metro Transit, 37 years is indeed quite an accomplishment. Sometimes it doesn't take all that many months or years for someone to make a significant impact in this organization. As you know, the last couple of years we've invested in our strategic initiatives division, trying to build up our analytical firepower, and we really have had some really talented people in that division, some on a temporary basis, and one of those people we're going to recognize today. So I'd like to introduce Eric Lind, who will introduce our second nominee.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Eric Lind. I'm a manager of research and analytics in the strategic initiatives group that Brian was just describing. And it's really my privilege to introduce you today to Kim Key. Kim started as an undergraduate intern as a student at McAllister College in 2014, started as a Met Council intern. One of the first employees of the Strategic Initiatives Group, actually. And then after a brief hiatus after graduation and foray into the consulting world, she came back as a full-time employee February 2017. So as Brian mentioned, not that long that she's been here, but it's really hard. It would be hard to overstate the impact she's had. She's had such enormous impact. So Kim is an extraordinarily talented programmer. She has a way of taking data, operational data, and turning it into stories and ways of people that they can interact with the data and understand really when we're measuring something, what's going on. So I really just wanted to share a few examples real quickly of the type of work that Kim has been doing. So what you're going to see is a few sort of screen captures of things that Kim has put together. One is up on the screen right now, which is a way of visualizing our ridership trend. So things that we measure all the time, how many people are riding by route, by day, by time of day. And it's taken this and turned it into a way where it's easy to visualize not just what's been going on, but then what is the future projection for these trends. This is one of my favorites. We've worked with engineering facilities on their shelter projects for a long time. You're aware of the Better Bus Stops project. What's going on now is they're trying to prioritize their shelter projects, placing them in areas based on different criteria, ridership and other, especially equity criteria. So Barry Farrington, who is one of the people in engineering facilities we work with, came to us with this pencil drawing she had made on her dining room table, saying, you know what would be great is if we had an app that could do this, and I'm thinking these, legends over here, and then maybe these bar charts. And then a few short months later, it exists. Kim took that pencil drawing and obviously connected it to the wealth of data that we have that's behind it, and made it into something that's now being used as we speak to prioritize shelter placement in the field. So the work that Kim has been doing is really having an impact on the ground by making this data available to people to use. I think she's referred to this as her baby, which is the Speed app. It's a way for you to pick out a street segment and visualize how fast the buses are moving, again, by time of day, by route. And then let me just skip to the last example, because you heard last time you met about the ways that we're trying to monitor the 35W94 construction project. Kim has developed very extensive reporting in terms of the bus speeds at a very small distances, so on the order of 50 to 100 feet across the segments, and we can really see, literally look for the hot spots of where things are going wrong and where we need to turn our attention to. So these are just some of the examples, and there are more. I could go on about the ways that Kim has contributed, but really in this short amount of time, she's really set the standard for what strategic initiatives should be able to do. And so I'm happy to present to you Kim Key.
Madam Chair, Commission, we actually met at the Mini Analytics Big Data Conference at Normandale College this spring. We ended up just sitting coincidentally at the same lunch table, and she noticed my little Metro Transit, and she said, "What do you do for Metro Transit?"
Congratulations. I was actually just at a conference and they talked about the things that transit agencies need was a data scientist, a behavioral scientist, and a storyteller. It sounds like you are too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is reports. MTS Director Thompson.
Madam Chair and members, a couple updates tonight. Last week, MTS, along with Communications, had the opportunity to speak before the Equity Advisory Committee to talk about the transportation planning process and seek their input on where we could engage that EAC and different steps in our planning process. We went there because we're in the public comment period for the TPP, but really it was not to receive comments about TPP, but to talk about what our work plan is and how projects in the planning process where different roles can play, where you can really have an influence. We did have quite a really lengthy discussion. I think we could have went on for a couple more hours, but we got some good feedback and follow-up, and I think it was a productive way to engage on how we can have equity measures in our planning and where we have weaknesses and opportunities. So anticipate we'll be going back to that group in the future on many occasions. And also an update on the regional solicitation. That is closed now, and we received 136 applications from 39 different stakeholders this year. That's up slightly from the last round 2 years ago. They requested $420 million worth of projects. I'm sure all of these are very good projects, but we have approximately $200 million to distribute. By category, we had 43 roadway projects, 33 transit and TDM projects, and 60 bike and ped projects. So tremendous demand for bike, as we've had in the past. I think $120 million in bike facility requests this time. Our next steps are we go through all the applications and make sure they all qualify and begin scoring and ranking. There are always a few projects that are deemed unqualified for the process, and the applicants are notified and they will have an opportunity to appeal that decision at the TAB Funding and Programming Committee in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll be on track to continue scoring and project selection through January. With that, I'd be open to any questions from the committee.
Are there questions from committee members? Gentleman from there.
Yes, Madam Chair, members, as you may have seen last week, ridership on all of our rail lines has continued to grow this year. After seeing annual records in 2017, North Star ridership is up another 5%, while Green Line is up almost 3%, and Blue Line is up at 1%. System-wide, Metro Transit system-wide, more than 39.6 million rides have been taken through the end of June. And overall, ridership is still down 3% due to nearly a 5% drop in bus ridership. We continue to focus on building bus ridership by focusing on speed and reliability issues. Examples include that, of course, that new limited stop Route 54 that we had our celebration for just recently, as well as speeding up service on Route 2 beginning next month. We're excited about the progress that's being made on Hennepin Avenue, where we continue to work with the city of Minneapolis on permanent bus-only lanes and other improvements that will pave the way for the future future bus rapid transit line. But on that note, we also, as you know, continue to struggle in terms of being able to provide our service every single day, and we've been cutting service for lack of having available operators. So we are moving to a next generation plan where we can really ultimately be able to not have an unpredictable level of service every day. And so we'll find out more about that as we finalize our plans over the course of the next week or two. So I'll keep you posted on that. It's time to celebrate, though. Council members are invited to attend an upcoming celebration recognizing the participants of our technician training program. One program that I know that several of you have been very, very supportive of over the last few years. The program will celebrate the first group to go through the complete program, graduating this program, or this summer, and other bus maintenance interns who are still in the program. The ceremony will run from 2:30 to 4 on Tuesday, August 7th at the Hennepin Technical College in Brooklyn Park. Our workforce development unit also continues to focus on meeting our need to hire more bus operators. Applicant preparation classes begin in June and will continue through the end of August. For a schedule, you can visit our website. And finally, State Fair. As we get closer to August, State Fair time is coming around the corner. And discounted State Fair bus tickets go on sale next week. Discounted single and group tickets can be purchased online at our service centers starting on August 1st through the start of the fair. Discounted tickets will also be available through our app through the end of the fair. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I have one. And maybe I missed it, but the A-line, how is the ridership on the A-line?
A-line continues to be up. We're up about 7%, I think, from last year. So we had a rapid 33, and we're still growing from that point.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, I just have maybe it's a question, maybe it's a comment, but Brian's comments about the challenge of finding operators, it's so resonant. I mean, I feel like in the last 5 days, I talked to a restaurant manager, an accounting firm owner, a contractor. I mean, we've sort of anticipated an acute pinch point, and it's arrived. But I wondered, Brian, is there among state agencies any kind of communication or initiative underway to draw attention to this pretty significant, and I presume, probably statewide shortage issue in terms of skilled labor?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cummers, it's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. We've been working with not only state agencies in order to try to kind of develop some common strategies and be able to kind of build on some common investments, but also to target, for instance, the veterans and through the Veterans Affairs Department, and as well as others, to try to see if there are market segments that we can more proactively tap into. And we really have done, I think, a pretty good job of staying, active. The other thing that we're really working on, though, is trying to streamline some of our front-end processes enough. So oftentimes in the past, it could take several weeks, up to a month, month and a half from the time a person first expressed or filled out their application until we finally get around to kind of looking at the application process to make them a conditional employment application. We're hoping to bring that down to maybe a day or 2 days in the very near future, so that we've really improved some of those things as well.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? On to the business part of our agenda. There are no consent items, and there is one non-consent item. It's 2018-197. It's the North Star Border Funding Agreement, and Petrie is here.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Ed Petrie, Metro Transit. I'm here with the annual request for North Star. This is for our annual operating grant agreement application with MnDOT for North Star funding. If you recall, I'm getting some feedback from the mic there. I'll move back. North Star funding, once again, we received more North Star funding from the state of Minnesota, and then Hennepin County, which used to be CTIP, but now it's Hennepin County, Anoka County, Sherburne County, and then MnDOT. So this agreement would be, or this request tonight is to enter into the agreement with the state of Minnesota Department of Transportation, or MnDOT, for calendar year 2019 to provide the funding for the public commuter rail service in Sherburne County, Minnesota for an amount up to $1.5 million. And then also execute the attached resolution of the governing body, which is the council, to enter into this agreement with the state of Minnesota for calendar year 19. So this is our standard agreement to provide 8.05% of the subsidy for Greater Minnesota from MnDOT. With that, Chair, committee members, I would stand for questions.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's our business.
And I think I will stay here.
And we are clicking right along. Yes, I back to the end. If the committee's okay with that. Pretty standard. Next up is information, and Ed will be joined by Heather for our 2019 operating budget presentation.
Well, good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Ed Petrie, Metro Transit.
Heather Augustin-Hebner, MTS.
And we're here for the annual presentation of the 2019 annual operating budget for Metro Transit and Metropolitan Transportation Services. The first thing I just want to say with our 2019 budget, it's consistent with what we had talked about last year. It's consistent with all the budget parameters that we have discussed over the last year, including some of our structural issues that we have. So 2019, we're just kind of implementing what we had discussed with you and with the council over the last year. So we'll go into some more of the details. I'll go through one budget slide that kind of talks about the structural issues that we have and kind of where we're sitting at today, and then moving forward, and then we can go into some of the parameters for the 2019 budget. Overall, with the budget considerations and pressures, as you recall, we did receive some one-time state funding in the 2018 legislature, last year's legislature. It was $70 million, which I'll talk about in the next chart, but it was $70 million in one-time funding. It did not address our structural issue, but it did solve the problem for the 2018-2019 biennium. One of the other things that we have done with this budget, though, is we've also, in addition to working on the budget, we've also reviewed it with all the different financial forecasts that the council prepares. As you're aware, we do a four-year toolbox. We also do then the financial plans, for example, that we file with Southwest, with the FDA, with Southwest or Botno. And we also then do a Transway investment report that used to be done by MnDOT and is now being taken over by or is now being prepared and completed by the council. So I kind of look at it as kind of a four-legged stool. So we're making sure that all of our budgets, the forecasts, the toolbox, the federal financial plans, making sure they're all in sync. So that is one of the things that we've worked very hard. Heather and I have worked very hard with Paul Connery and Mary Bogey's budget staff to make sure that everything is in line and is in sync. The structural and financial position that I referred to, I'll kind of go through a few different stages here and discussion points. When we originally adopted the 2018 budget in state fiscal year 2018-19, which we had previously discussed with the council, we had about a $102 million deficit, as you see there. Going up to the future two bienniums, we had $162 million in the 2021, and then it jumps to $217 million, continues to increase in the next biennium, up to a total for the 6-year biennial period of $481 million shortfall. A few adjustments came forward. First of all, we did receive the February 2018 motor vehicle sales tax forecast. If you recall, we received forecasts for motor vehicle sales tax twice a year, in February and in November. When we adopted the 2018 budget, it was based upon the November 2017 motor vehicle sales forecast. When February came in, it was a little better than what the previous November had shown. So as you can see, over the 18-19 biennium, it had a positive impact on us of about $4 million. The next biennium, $26 million, and then the biennium thereafter, $33 million. The next adjustment, if you recall, it was on April 25th. The council approved a budget adjustment for Metro Transit where we made a base adjustment of $8 million to the Metro Transit budget, which was mainly due to OPEB, the post-retirement benefit savings, due to fully funding our plan. That has about an $8 million per year savings to the council, so we were able then to layer that into the biennial forecast. After the budget was adopted, we received some adjustments to the suburban transit providers' budgets, looking at their preserved budgets. That was about $6 to $7 million a year. Heather will talk about some of the challenges that she faces and Nick faces with the Metro Mobility. We're seeing service increases continue on the Metro Mobility side. That has an impact of about $2 million in the 2018-2019 budget. Then it grows to 10 and then 13 in the future biennial budgets. We then had some other minor adjustments of about $2 to $3 million a year when we were linking all the budget numbers between the Southwest financial plans, between the Transitway reports, between our toolbox and the budgets, linking everything in. We had to make some minor tweaks in some of the revenues and some of the expenses of about $2 million a year, but it was a positive impact to the budget. That then brought us to our preliminary base of the $73 million in the 2018-2019 budget that we had previously talked to the council about when we were in the legislative session. And then while we were going through the legislative session, we did receive, as it shows there, the one-time state appropriation funding of $70 million. You'll notice in the 2021-2022 biennial budget's at zero. So once again, that is in our base 18-19 base. It will go away starting as of July 1st of 2019. It disappears. So it's just a one-time funding. Calendar year 2017, as motor vehicle sales tax does go up and down, motor vehicle sales tax did not perform as well in calendar year 17 as what we had anticipated. The future forecasts going out are recovering, but in calendar year 17 did not perform as well. It was actually $14 million for the 18-19 period under what we had originally planned. If you recall, which I'll talk about in a few slides forward here, but with motor vehicle sales tax, the council made the decision when we went onto that revenue source back in 2008 that we only budget 95% of the state forecast. Because of the uncertainty with that, with the additional 5%, you just never know whether you're going to collect it or not. So what we've always done since 2008 is we will budget 95% of the motor vehicle sales in our current year budget, and then the additional receipts that we receive up and above that 95% would then be forecasted in the next year's budget. But we did have a one-time underperformance of about $14 million. The next item is one of the items that Mr. Lamb and Nick have talked about over the last year. One of the things that we've been working on really, really hard within the transportation division is we've done a lot of cost containment in 2017 and moving forward into 2018. A number of positions that Mr. Lamb has held open. We're reviewing those on an as-needed basis to determine whether or not they need to be filled. These are exclusive, though. They do not include operators and mechanics. Operators and mechanics, as they become open, we fill. But these are mainly overhead positions that we're looking at and really questioning, do we need to fill? We're also looking at, or we had looked at all of our different contracts, maintenance type contracts, those types of costs. Whether or not do we need to really move forward with that maintenance work, or can we do it internally and or delay it? The positive thing is it pushed an additional amount into our calendar year 2017 reserves of about $12 million that we're about $50 million that we're able to use now in calendar years 18 and 19. It's not the full solution, but it did help to offset some of the motor vehicle sales tax underperformance. We had some other minor tweaks of about $2 million in 19 and $1 million in 20, or fiscal year 21, or 20 rather. That was some additional CMAQ revenue that we were going to receive on some service. So with the structural position right now, with our state fiscal year 2018 and 2019 budgets, we're balanced. We're balanced at zero. We have no issues. Moving forward into the 20 and 21 budgets, you can see we're able to use additional reserves of $56 million into the next biennium, which we'll go through a budget slide in a few minutes, that as a result of the continued cost containment and planned cost containment, we have built additional reserves that we can use into the next biennium. But with that, we still have a remaining $53 million shortfall. So we're able to address part of the problem, but we can't solve the entire problem. Then moving into the 22 and 23 biennium, we have the $156 or $157 million shortfall that we're out of reserves, we're down at the council's minimums, and we have no other solutions as of this point in time to identify it. So the message is the 2018-2019 biennium, we're balanced. Into the next biennium, we start going into the red in state fiscal year 2021, so that would be around the July of 2020 period. We feel that we're balanced through about June 30th of 2020. And then we have then a $53 million hole in the next biennium, and then it continues to grow.
Councilwoman McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you explain that again? You were talking about the invest being 95%, because for my understanding is we're getting less and less. But yet in 2020 and 2021, moving forward to 2023, you're forecasting a much greater amount. Is that because it's 95% of? I'll just let you explain that.
Chair, committee members, we budget off of the state of Minnesota forecast. So the state of Minnesota forecast in November of 2017 was significantly down. Part of the issue was the issue with that they were having with motor vehicles, with the motor vehicle at the registration, was it the MNLAR system, I believe it was, with the tracking of everything. So as a result, between November and February, they got some of that corrected. They were able then to revise their forecast, because when we received the November forecast in 2017, we also talked to the state and suspected it was low. And so it did come up a little bit from what they had previously forecasted, but you are correct. We budget 95% with the anticipation anything above that will be used in future years. But the moral of the story is that the forecast in February 18 did show some recovery because of the MNLARS issue, and it was up higher than what they had previously forecasted. I don't know if I addressed your question totally. So this is a function of the state forecast.
Okay.
And we budget 95% of the state forecast. So we will be watching very closely now when we get the November 2018 forecast to see, does it hold, go up or down? And that'll be one of the things that we will address when we actually adopt the 2019 budget. That will be one of the things that could adjust this, and could adjust our 2019 budget before we actually adopt it with the council in December, because we will have the November 2018 forecast. So one of the things that could change this is if motor vehicle sales tax goes up or down, and those types of things. And either way, we will let the council know when we adopt in December if there's any change with that.
Councilmember Elkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm sure the MNLARS thing injected some volatility into the MVS, but aside from that, I mean, what have we actually been running the last several years? Because we actually did have a year where we met the forecast, as I recall.
Yeah, Chair, committee members, there were a couple years that we hit like 100 or just over almost 101%. But the last 2 years we have been under. The last year I think was just over 96%.
96.
The year before that I think it was like 97.5%.
Is it reasonable to raise the 95 to like 97?
Chair, committee members, you could, but one of the challenges that we have as a fact is that with our system, if we don't, if you're between 95 and 96%, you don't have a lot of room there. And the issue, if we do hit a budget issue, it takes us a long time, a significant amount of time to make a change, whether it's a fare increase or service reductions or those types of items. So it's a conservative measure, we realize that, but there's also the uncertainty with.
This is our contingency.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Typically it is.
Councilmember Elkins, we intend to spend 100% of the MVS revenue. It's just that by budgeting only 95%, it gives us a little bit more lead time should we need to make adjustments to that budget, whether service or other costs. So it's really kind of a budget smoothing technique. Now, the other thing I wanted to emphasize, though, in the long range, just as Ed was talking about syncing up all those budget forecasts, we're required to actually use the state budget forecast for MVS as part of our longer range forecast. So even though we might be skeptical at times that we're going to meet that target, we have to use it by state law.
And Chair, committee members, one of the things I will add also with that, with our long-range forecast, for example, with motor vehicle sales tax, we're syncing up with MnDOT. We're using the same percentage that they're using. A long-term forecast, MnDOT is using growth of 3.4% for motor vehicle sales tax for the years outside of the state forecast, and we're syncing up with MnDOT's numbers.
Director Thompson.
I just update too, Madam Chair, the suburban providers, with the policy change, we're giving them 100% of their share fare forecast and asking that we're suggesting that they budget at 95 too, but they now independently make their own budgeting decisions at the suburban side. I'm not sure what they've adopted as a policy, but we've recommended to them. We've indicated to them we're not changing our strategies on our budgeting.
So are fleets of shared vehicles on Minnesota Revenue's radar yet? Nick knows what I'm talking about.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, we have, I don't know if it's not necessarily on their forecast, but we have been talking about it a lot with the shared vehicle and autonomous vehicles and other ways that one of the big risks is that there could be quite a bit fewer vehicles purchased in some of these scenarios. And then talking about how that would be a major issue for transportation investment in transit and highways and so it's an issue we are raising, but I don't, at the state agencies, they're not quite looking out that far, I don't think, in their forecasting yet.
Are there further questions? I wanted to highlight something from the presentation, Ed. I understand that we are balanced in 18, 19, and 20, but we are balanced in 18 and 19 with temporary funding, significant temporary funding.
That's correct.
And we are balanced in 2020 because we tried to bank and cut costs as much as possible, and we had reserves.
That's
So
correct.
there is still, through 18, 19, and 2020, a structural operational deficit.
That's correct.
I just wanted to highlight that. I mean, I think it's admirable that we saved, and because we knew we were going to have this deficit coming up, but that is not sustainable going into the future.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Any questions?
Shall we move forward?
Thank you.
There we go. I'm gonna go. So moving forward into the 2019 budget presentation, some of the budget considerations and pressures that we have, Heather will talk about metro mobility, about ridership growth in the task force, inflationary growth we've built into the budget, which we tied to all of our financial forecasts at 3.15% inflationary growth. We've talked about motor vehicle sales tax performance. Our light rail vehicles are continuing to age, continuing to get older. In fact, some of our Bombardier vehicles have now reached 1 million miles. So we are moving into maintenance overhauls or continued maintenance overhauls on both the Bombardier and the Siemens vehicles. That will continue in 2019. We have some continued initiatives working on our transit asset management, which we'll talk about, and the travel behavior inventory. And then Mr. Nicky will be coming back later to the Transportation Committee and the Council for further discussions on the Fair Policy Review. And that should be coming within the next month or two. The objectives, we continue to support Thrive MSP 2040. And through the Thrive lens, we continue to look at preserving service while growing ridership, prioritizing structural solutions to mitigate any structural gaps over time, as we've talked about with our biennial budgets. Continue to minimize impacts on council levies, and maintain our reserve levels at the council policy levels. Some of the mitigating revenue and expense volatility that we have discussed, motor vehicle sales tax, we budget 95%. That is something that we have done since 2008. Anything up above the 95%, as we have talked about and Mr. Lamb has talked about, we do budget then in the following year. We continue to do fuel forward pricing. We consume just over 7 million gallons of diesel fuel on an annualized basis. We're the biggest consumer of diesel fuel in the state of Minnesota. And we actually lock in our prices for about 85 to 90% of that consumption volume for the next 18 to 24 months out. We do that for budget certainty. Operating fund reserve targets, we have used those to not only to address short-term volatility, short-term changes in revenues and expenses. We've also used that as we've discussed, as a partial solution for the future biennial shortfalls. And as the chair has pointed out, that is those are one-time fixes, as we noted in the chart, as of state fiscal year 2020, that's a one-time fix that we're out of. But fortunately, we had the foresight to start saving money to use those short-term monies. The overall proposed 2019 operating budget for the Transportation Division is just over $593 million. Over on the expense side, you can see the family services. We have Metro Transit Bus in at $345 million. We have Metro Transit Capital. That is capital salaries, for example, staff that are working on the Botno project, Southwest project, or any of the large engineering projects. Those are staff salaries that are being paid for with federal funds, federal and capital funds. We have the Green Line budget in at just over $41 million budget. Blue Line at $38 million. You have North Star, Metro Mobility budget, which Heather will go into detail on that, just over $82 million or 14%. And then the balance of transportation planning, transit link, and regular route contracted service. On the revenue side, it's pretty consistent with the prior years, except for one item which I'll talk about. But we have motor vehicle sales tax, which is 41% of our budget. State general fund appropriations, which is just over $190 million or 18%. We have the federal funding, which will then cover the capital salaries, but also there's also federal funding in there for CMAQ dollars, and then also for our TDM marketing. Fares come in at just over 20% of our budget, $116 million. Other revenue includes mainly advertising revenue and interest income. The advertising revenue, which would be all your bus wraps and all of your light rail vehicle wraps that you see. Other funds transfer is the planned use of the motor vehicle sales tax. As we stated, anything up and above the 95% goes into a motor vehicle sales tax reserve to be used for the future year operations. So this is collections from the prior years that are now being used now in 2019. Prior years collections up and above the 95% that now move into 2019 then. That's the $17 million. We have a planned use reserves of $21 million, which is due to our revenue allocations that we have previously discussed. The change in our budget is it now says counties. Is previous years that would always say CTIB. Now it's the counties due to the dissolution of CTIB. Some of the Thrive slides that we'll go through here. First of all, one of the things that's built into the 2019 budget is the C line. The C line, is, as we've talked about, is an 8.5 mile line from downtown Minneapolis to the Brooklyn Center. It's got 23 stations. It's planned to move into construction in 2018 with opening in 2019. It's about a $20 million non-fleet project request. Some of the amenities that it'll have on the C line is that it'll have pre-boarding fare payment, so it'll be like a light rail system where all doors will open up, off-board payment. People will move on to the bus. It'll also have transit signal priority. Ridership is going to be very strong. Today it has about 7,600 rides. We're forecasting about 9,300 rides by the year 2030. So that's C line planned for going into operation in 2019. Asset management, as we talked about last year, and again now this year, the asset management plan we've been working on, Heather and I have been working both internally and also with the private providers on our asset management plan for the region. Our first plan is due to the FTA in October of 2018, so we're working on that very closely. We're going through internal review on the draft plan. That will be coming to both the Transportation Committee and the Council probably in about the August-September timeline for review and approval. But our first plan, as I stated, will be due to the federal government in October of 2018.
So I'll transition to me for this slide. So this is a slide that we showed you last year, but we wanted to highlight it again this year because it is a significant investment. The TBI informs transit or transportation planning and forecasting for all major projects in the region. As a reminder, in 2017, we shifted to a 10-year rolling TBI. This allowed the region to better adapt to technological and economic changes and provide us fresher data on an ongoing basis. This allows the region to be more confident in our forecasting and project development. It's also a good representation of how the region works together to come up with creative funding mechanisms. So in the case of the TBI, it's a partnership between the regional solicitation, MnDOT, and the council. The Metro Mobility Task Force, as I think everybody know, completed their work in about February of this year and handed their report off to the legislature. And the task force examined ways to improve Metro Mobility services, limit costs, and improve efficiencies. Recommendations continue to be reviewed and acted upon. One example of this was legislation proposed this last session that would have allowed data sharing between Metro Mobility and the Department of Human Services. This bill was ultimately not passed, but we anticipate it will be taken up again during the next legislative session. We also continue to explore the concept of on-demand service using transportation network companies.
Moving forward with the next slide is on fund balances. As we previously discussed, you can see at the end of 2016, the overall fund balance for the Transportation Division was just over $85 million. Over on the far right-hand side, you can see what the council target is. Those are what, based on council policy, are the council minimums that we require. The Metro Transit Family Bus, Light Rail, Commuter Rail, it's at 8.3% of our operating expenses or 1 month expense. Metro Mobility has a minimum reserve of 10%. And the transportation planning and the contract services have minimum reserve balances of 15%. So our target balance in 2019, or our target balance is about $51 million in reserves, minimum council reserves. You can see it through now into 2017 as a result of the cost containment measures that the council and the transportation division put in place in 2017. We were able to actually build our reserves from $85 million up to the $120 million in 2017. Now we have that planned use reserves of $20 million in 2018, continued use of reserves now in 2019, and then we will then use the rest of that in 2020. But luckily, unfortunately, because of the planned cost containment, we were able to build the reserves for the one-time fixes to take us through 2020. But the council target is $51.3 million. Now we'll move into the Metro Transit family of the budgets. Metro Transit budget assumptions in 2018 include maintaining our 2018 service levels. We also include a contingency for any overloads and bus bridge support we need between bus and light rail. All of our service levels include the adjustments of what we need for operators, mechanics, fuel, and parts to meet the service plan. We do have a plan of ridership at 81.8 million rides, which includes also the recovery of ridership due to the fare increase that we had last year. If you recall, with the fare increase, we anticipate about 18 to 24 months of a ridership, 4.5% to 5% decline. And this includes now the anticipation of the ridership continuing to come back in 2019. Diesel fuel forward priced at $1.84 a gallon. We have the switchover of the county funding from C10 funding. We have the county funding for the Metro Blue Line and Green Line and North Star. We are anticipating that the Southwest Light Rail project, we will continue to get approval from the FTA, and we will then apply for a full funding grant agreement in fall of 2018, with the hopes of a full funding grant agreement in 2019 from the FTA for Southwest. As we previously stated, C-Line operations in 2019. We do have some additional costs in the budget for the continued I-35W construction. And then we do have some new CMAX service, which would be the Route 54 Mall of America extension to Maplewood. Some additional assumptions that we do have built in the budget is we have continued discussions of the regional fare policy that will continue. Mr. Yule will be coming back to you and the council, full council, sometime in August, September timeline to talk about regional fare policy and the research that we have done. As we've talked about, the light rail vehicles and the commuter rail vehicles are moving to their overhaul programs. The stat that we like to talk about is some of the Bombardier vehicles are now hitting 1 million miles on their vehicles. And we've talked about the development of the Transit Asset Management Plan. Here's a quick snapshot of the Metro Transit ridership. We're forecasting the 81.8 million rides, slightly up from the 2018 budget. As Mr. Ladd talked about, right now through the month of June, we are down just over 2% overall on our system. But we are anticipating, with the recovery from the fare increase, that we should hopefully will hit 81.8 million rides next year. Now let's move into the Metro Transit family of services. The Metro Transit bus budget is $345 million. You can see very labor intensive. About 78% of our budget is salaries and benefits. And we have the materials and supplies, utilities, regional allocations, fuel, and then other costs, which would mainly be some like lease costs and some professional services. The revenue side, we're mainly covered by motor vehicle sales tax, which is about 62% of our budget. Then we have fares in at 22%. We have the federal funds, which is CMAX service, and some of our marketing costs. All other revenues, which is mainly advertising revenue and interest income. We have the planned fund balance transfer from motor vehicle sales tax, planned use of reserves, and then state appropriation funding. But it's a $345 million budget for bus operations. Moving into the Metro Blue Line, it's a $38.7 million expense budget. Once again, very labor intensive with salaries and benefits of just over $19.6 million or 51%. Instead of fuel, they have the propulsion costs. Then we have the balance of the costs, including utilities, regional allocations, other costs, supplies, and then our shared modal allocations, which are for shared costs between bus, rail, and commuter rail. Those are for like shared services, whether it's police services or fare collection or those types of items that we have the cost in Metro Transit bus, but we're able to share those services across the respective lines, and they get their allocatable share for those services. On the revenue side, it's a little different on the blue and the green line from the bus operations. It includes the passenger fares in at 31%. It includes state appropriation funds. It includes the county money. Instead of CTIP, it does include counties in at 33% or $12.9 million. And then other revenue of $1.4 million, which would be advertising revenue. Metro Green Line, which is mirror of the Metro Blue Line, it's a $41.6 million. Has the same type of expenses on the expense side of salaries and benefits, propulsion, etc. On the revenue side, we have $13.1 million of state funding coming in, or 32% of the budget. The counties would be 32% of the budget at $12.9 million, and then passenger fares in at 34%, and then advertising of $800,000. The Metro Transit North Star line, which is a little different than the other two rail lines. On the expense side, it's a $20.2 million budget. On the expense side, the largest piece you'll see there will be BNSF. If you recall, BNSF, we contract with BNSF on an annualized basis to operate our trains, so their people operate our trains, both conductors and then the operators. That is about a $6.4 million budget for next year. Salaries and benefits, which would be our maintenance staff and our cleaners, et cetera, about $4.9 million. And you have the fuel costs, the diesel fuel, the regional allocations, insurance, supplies, and the allocations again. On the revenue side, it's a little different than the rail lines. In the light rail lines, is you have the state funds in there at $7.4 million or 36%. You have fares of about 14%. And then you have the platter then of the counties, which would include both Hennepin County and Anoka County. And then you have Greater Minnesota, MnDOT, and Sherburne County. So that is a little different than our rail lines, but North Star does have a $20.2 million planned budget for 2019.
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Schreiber.
Thank you. Just a little clarification. With the dissolution of C10, Anoka and Hennepin are still using sales tax.
Chair, committee members, that's
Their
correct.
share.
Yeah, they did issue sales tax. That's
Yeah, and Sherburne is using property taxes.
Sherburne is
That's the
using
case.
property taxes.
Okay.
That's correct. So when the counties went off of the CTIB board, all the 5 counties then agreed as part of the dissolution of CTIB then to stop issuing sales tax via CTIB and then issue sales tax individually. Yep. That was part of the resolution of dissolution. The Metro Transit budget, overall, consolidated, it's a $445 million budget. We have an overall revenue increase of 4.3%, and expense increase of 4.9%. And you'll see the $7.9 million planned use of reserves to balance our budget in 2019. And then the full consolidation for Metro Transit then brings in the additional slice of the capital salaries for the people that are working on the various capital projects. That's an additional $26.4 million, which will mainly be paid for with federal and local funds. It brings us to a total Metro Transit budget of $472 million. FTEs for Metro Transit. You will notice the major change with our FTEs is on the bus system, which is due to additional operators for the C line and additional police for like fare inspection, safety, and security measures. Blue, Green Line, and North Star, and all the various project offices, you can see there's virtually no change from the prior year. But the main change on the bus system would be the C line and some for I-35W, and then, like I mentioned, the police. And with that, we can move on to MTS.
So on the
Councilmember Connors.
Ask a question, Ed. I wanted to follow up. I know that we had some conversation about this a couple of years ago, but your sequence reminded me just to ask the question about the range of fare box recovery that you've presented here, particularly North Star being less than half of the sort of second next, being bus at 22% and North Star at 14%. Could you refresh me about what are sort of the underlying factors that make North Star less than half of the other fixed rail modes that we operate?
Okay, Chair, committee members. Well, one of the main reasons for North Star is the fact is that it is pretty well end-to-end service. Mm-hmm. With for example, like on the Hiawatha line or the Green Line, where the case would be just like our bus service. As the lines are going, you have continued turnover of the ridership. The North Star service is more like an express service, which is an end-to-end service, a lot less turnover of the rides. If you want to add anything to that, Mr. Lamb.
No, Madam Chair, Councilmember Commerce, it is the nature of the service in that it is, peak only. So you incur all of the overhead and fixed costs, and then you're only able to kind of spread those costs over the 6 trips essentially each direction that you provide for. So it is a higher, cost to revenue base.
It's a pure peak-oriented service.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Councilmember McCarthy.
I'm just curious, if perchance, or If we compared it to like an express bus, how much less would a similar kind of service with express bus be compared to North Star?
Chair, committee members, I don't have that information. We could do some analysis on that, but I do not have that information right offhand.
Because that question has been asked of me many a times.
Madam Chair, Councilmember McCarthy, generally, an express bus will run a fare recovery that's higher than the North Star, but that's because it shares its overhead costs with the local services as well. So it's not like it's not a standalone operation. And between the maintenance, it's unique, both for the vehicles as well as for facilities, et cetera. And so it really has limited opportunities to, I'll say, spread its cost burden over multiple types of service. So it's unique to North Star rail operation. Rather than bus, you can have all of its support costs allocated based on the hours, et cetera. But we can get you the range.
Madam Chair,
Councilmember Schreiber.
in defense of my little North Star. It was originally designed to go all the way to St. Cloud. That was the population center, and you had the college there, and the reverse commute numbers were very, very good. Towards the end of that, or as we were getting into the project, we were told it had to stop at Big Lake because it was not double-tracked. There's nothing at Big Lake, folks. There is not a population center there. And little known fact, Burlington Northern has since installed double track all the way to St. Cloud. And this year there were a number of bills introduced by St. Cloud legislators trying to get that line extended. Now, it might not happen during our time here, but now there's interest from the St. Cloud legislators, and it'll probably come. You know, it just makes sense. That's where the population center is. And now that the Burlington Northern paid the cost of double tracking, that takes away a huge expense of extending that line. So just to bring you up to date.
I don't see further questions. Want to continue?
Okay, so let's transition to MTS. Many of our assumptions are similar to Metro Transit, so some of them I'm just going to go over fairly quickly. So in our 2018 budget for MTS, it's really a preservation budget. We're planning to maintain the 2018 service levels with the exception of Metro Mobility. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, 2019 budget. So we're going to maintain 2018 service levels in the 2019 budget with the exception of Metro Mobility, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the future slides. With the dissolution of CTIB, 100% of the Metro Red Line and Cedar Express services are now in the MTS budget funded with MBEST. And one of the things that you will notice is a pretty significant difference between the MTS and the Metro Transit bus are fuel costs. One of the things that MTS does not do is we do not hedge gasoline. Every year, we have our Treasury Department take a look at, does it make sense? And every year so far, the Treasury Department has said, just due to our volume, it doesn't make sense, and we should and they recommend managing within the budget. That is what we have been doing. In some years, you're going to notice there's a pretty significant cost difference. One of the other challenges that we have is our service model. Our services are provided by contracted providers. Those providers change based upon when contracts are awarded, and not all of the providers have the facilities that would allow us, just the facilities to have the correct tanks for the fuel and the diesel. So if you're wondering why that's so different, this is it. Now that model does save us money. You know, we don't have a lot of the facility costs that we would have to if we had to have our own garages, but this is one place you're going to notice a pretty significant difference. Our planning department is going to continue to work on the travel behavior inventory, which I talked about earlier. We're going to continue to work on transit asset management. In addition to the work that Ed talked about before, one of the big projects that's in the MTS budget is we've been doing a regional assessment of all facilities so that every single facility in the entire region, including the suburban transit providers, are assessed using uniform criteria so that when we put everything together, we have one set of data that we can use uniformly across the region. We are also passing through revenues based on the state transit funding allocation policy, which the council enacted in December of 2017. And we're going to continue to work with Metro Transit on the regional fare policy review. MTS ridership is expected to come in at about 5.2 million rides in 2019. All areas, with the exception of Metromobility, are anticipated to be either minor decreases or to stay consistent with forecasts of the fare increase. Metromobility ridership is budgeted at 6.4% ridership increase. This is about a percentage lower than where we're at year to date at about 7.2, and it's slightly higher than the historical average of about 6.2. The MTS budget is very similar to what we looked at last year. As I mentioned before, our budget maintains operations for all services while meeting the demand needs of Metromobility. Our primary sources of revenue are state general fund, which is used on the Metromobility service, and motor vehicle sales tax, which is used on our other services, and we also have a significant amount of federal revenue, which is used primarily in our MPO function. I'll talk about each of the expenses individually. So let's first talk about Metromobility, because that is where the biggest conversation should be happening. First is that general fund pays for about 88% of Metromobility costs, and that's represented by two different pieces on this chart. One, it's the state appropriation, which is the large green slice, and the second is reserves. Those reserves are actually state general appropriation. So this represents some of the one-time money that this state gave us. If we would have spent it, it would have made that fiscal cliff that Ed was talking about earlier worse. So by holding on to it and using it to help fix the problem, we're able to be balanced for longer. So that's why you're seeing a fairly significant amount of reserves used in the Metromobility budget. On the expense side, one of the things you're going to notice as well on the Metro Transit side, the largest piece of the expense is going to be salaries and benefits. On the Metromobility side, you're going to see the largest piece of the pie being taken up by transit provider expenses, which is about 78%, or about 3/4 of our budget. 12% of our budget's used for fuel and materials, and the remaining 10% of the budget is used for basically support costs to make those programs work. It's council staff, it's regional allocation costs like information technology, invoice processing, all of those sort of overhead behind the scenes work that you need to execute the business. So as I mentioned before, year-to-date Metromobility ridership is 7.2% ahead of ridership in 2017. So a little preview is that we will likely be coming back to you for a budget amendment later this year. We're still looking at financials and doing some more forecasts, but we are way ahead of where we thought we were going to be. The fare increase did not impact ridership. In fact, ridership continues to climb in spite of the fare increase. So we're continuing to watch ridership very carefully moving forward. So the next two slides combine three of our services together: contracted regular route, transit link, and van pool. All three of these services have been designed to maintain current service levels. The services are funded primarily through motor vehicle sales tax and passenger fares, and our expense side, from a proportional standpoint, looks very similar to Metromobility in that most of our costs, again, go to pay provider expenses and fuel. Transportation planning and administration budget, again, is very similar to prior forecasts. It includes work related to the council's role as the MPO. This is where our financial support is. We pass a lot of money through to suburban transit providers and other agencies in the region. That those costs are embedded here as well. In a couple months, you're going to have a UPWP presentation, which is going to go into more detail about all of the different projects that the consulting dollars are going to be spent on. As I just mentioned, MTS passes through motor vehicle sales tax and state appropriation funding to suburban transit providers, including Maple Grove, Minnesota Valley Transit Authority, Plymouth, and Southwest Transit. We pass through funds as required by law and in accordance with the Council's transit funding policy that was adopted in December of 2017. Pass-through funds include statutory MVEST, allocated MVEST, and allocated state appropriations. The council currently passes through about $3 million more in state funding than is required by law. The regional funding policy has been a source of tension for many years. Suburban transit providers want more funds, and so do we. We are all in the same boat. Everybody needs more funding. Everybody wants more funding. The new policy did give suburban providers much of what they had been requesting from the council for many years, including much more freedom in setting their own financial policies, how they can use those funds, and it's administratively more simple for the council as well. So we have generally heard positive feedback about the policy, with the exception that they want more money, and so do we, and hopefully we can all work together and make that happen. So this slide talks about the overall MTS budget in a consolidated manner. Overall, we are having a 2.7% increase in revenues, an 8.3% increase in expenses, and a planned use of about $13.3 million of revenues. There's a couple areas of this chart I want to call out just because they do stand out. The first is that you're going to notice in local and other funding, it looks like there's a decrease of about $2 million. Those were MnDOT funds that were represented for TBI funding in 2018 that just by nature of the cycle are not going to show up in the 2019 budget. Metro Mobility, we're anticipating an expense increase of about 13%. That is really all due to the projected ridership increases and how those costs hit. And there's also basic inflation in there. There's contract inflation rates, salaries are going up, but from negotiated contracts. You're also going to note that regular route has a decrease of 2%. That's coming from two places. One is we continue to look to find efficiencies in the red line service. So some of those are cost reductions in the red line. And the other is there have been some federal subrecipient pass-through dollars that have been showing up in this line in the past. Those grants have ended, so those costs are now not showing up in that budget. Transit Link and Planning have planned increases of about 3.15%, just in line with all the forecasts that you have seen in the past. This chart shows the historic FTEs. So you'll see in 2011, we had 39 employees. In 2019, we're proposing 53. Most of the FTE increase you have seen over time is represented in the Metro Mobility. As ridership has gone up, we've needed more customer service folks. We've needed more folks to work on IS-related issues. Some of them are showing up as interns. So I think 3 or 4 of these are just intern positions that for one reason or another hadn't been counted, and when we put them in, they increased our FTE count. There have been a couple ads over the years in finance and grant administration too to help mitigate the risk. The positions that we're looking for in 2019, one is cost neutral. It's simply a transfer of an existing employee from communications to the MTS budget, and the other 2 are for Metro Mobility. One is a business analyst, and the other is a business analyst manager to help us basically make better use of our data. We have had some problems in the revenue system that we think we can tweak, and we can figure those out and just help our system work more efficiently and effectively. Data is important for all of us as we manage the budget, and that's what those 2 FTEs represent. So what's coming next is on August 8th, all of the divisions will be consolidated and will be presented to the council for a preliminary budget review. On August 22nd, you're going to be asked to adopt preliminary operating budgets and tax levies. In September or October, we're going to be coming back to you to the full council for a capital budget review. In October, you're going to be adopting public comment versions of the operating budgets, levies, and capital program. And on December 12th, we will be adopting final budget and levies. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions? We've had questions right along. So.
Madam Chair,
I'm wondering what a regional fare policy review looks like when so much is fluid, given whether the legislature is going to fund us or not.
So your question again, I apologize.
I'm wondering what a regional fare policy review looks like in an environment where whether we need to raise fares or not depends so much on whether the legislature is going to fund us or not.
Chair,
General Manager Lamb.
okay.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Munn, it's not as much of a review, but in terms of trying to observe and promote a best practice in terms of what are the trigger mechanisms that a governing board should use when looking at when is it appropriate to adjust fares, and ultimately trying to balance both the revenue elements but also the equity goals and objectives that this council has laid out. So by the end of this year, what we'd like to be able to do is to have this council be able to say, using these parameters, these are the course of how we look at what portion of your overall budget does it make sense that fares should represent.
Any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next information item is light rail training department update. Ona, you're gonna have to help me with your name.
Ona Pradhan.
Ona Pradhan, just like it's spelled. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. My name is Ona Pradhan, and I am the manager of the Light Rail Training and Development Division, located at Blue Line. And I'm really happy to be here this evening, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for having me. I've been in my newly created position for roughly a year and a half. And I just have to say that I've been extremely impressed with the management, my colleagues, and the staff that I've inherited and been able to hire. Everyone works extremely hard. We've really come a long way in the last year and a half. So I'm here to just give you a quick update on the changes and improvements we've made in the light rail training division. First thing, just to point out, the training division, my vision of that really looks to service all of the systems of light rail. So I work with LRB maintenance, with systems, and with operations, including the Rail Control Center. And it's a pleasure to work in collaboration with everyone to come to the best consensus and outcome when it comes to safe and efficient training standards. One of the first things that I tried to do and was successful in doing was creating a centralized site where all of our training project requests could come through, and we have a centralized SharePoint site that meets the needs of our training documentation, making sure that all the project requests from new employee training to special projects are tracked and monitored to make sure that they have a successful outcome. And this is for all systems and operations, and RCC included as well. The other thing, just to talk about what are some of the changes that we've made, I was able to hire a new signals training supervisor, which was a large gap in our training program. We were sometimes looked at as not having a full new employee training program, so we were able to hire a new person, and we've successfully created a new employee training program and handbook that all of our new signals technicians take part in. The operations training was actually pretty well developed when I came on board, and we've actually instituted every 2-week training meetings with our students. We've improved our field documentation, and we've standardized our final operator assessment, which means that across operations we're performing at a standard, and all of our trainers and rail coordinators and our relief instructors are successful in carrying this out. In our light rail vehicle maintenance department, we have created a new employee training program again that's standardized for our mechanics and helpers. We've been able to provide a specific training on APS, which is vendor training, along with CBUS, and one of our larger projects, which took roughly 8 months to complete, was creating an in-house welding qualification training that was specific to our rust mitigation project, and we partnered with Anoka Tech to carry this out, and we're currently running and beginning our second class, and this is an internal qualification for our mechanics as professional development, but also project specific. We're also currently providing first aid and CPR training light rail wide. This used to be just specific to systems. Now all of our safety oriented personnel are getting first aid and CPR training beginning this week. One of the other things that we took on was a 3-year project in the MTT LRT project, which some of you are familiar with. That is currently being managed in-house. And we are currently in our second year, which is phase 4. This is a 3-year project, and we currently have 7 participants. And we're hoping all 7 graduate and come back and become mechanics or signal technicians, which is the ultimate goal of this project. They're currently in second and third shifts at Green Line, Blue Line, and our systems location at RSF. And they are currently going to school full-time, and that is managed by the training department. And I meet with Hennepin Technical College weekly to make sure that we're on point with curriculum development and meeting our course objectives and outcomes. Some of the exciting projects that we have upcoming is Met Council is getting a new learning management system, so the Learn Center will go away very soon. One of the things that we've created too on the light rail side is a centralized record management system, which hopefully can be managed entirely within the learning management system. We also have Application Extender, which we're also storing all of our files that we no longer need as live. And I'm hoping to have a paperless environment by 2019. That might be a little lofty for us, but for the training department, I'd love to see a paperless environment by 2020 at least. And so the new learning management system will hopefully be here by the beginning of next year. The selection panel is already underway, and we're excited about some of the upcoming demos that we'll see with the new learning management system. I'm really happy to report that I'll be hiring a new LRV maintenance supervisor that can utilize the resources we currently have for training, but also to make sure that we are developing ongoing training, which is a gap in our services. We really want to keep the great staff that we have and keep them skilled and up to date with the latest technical and safety-oriented training that we can provide. I'm also very happy to report I'm hiring a rail control center training supervisor, a person that would be able to work on all 3 shifts and help the centralized operations team are very valuable, just as all our staff are, supervisors and senior supervisors that run the railroad. And that person will be in charge of their new employee training and ongoing training as well. We're currently undertaking a new project in certifying senior supervisors to continue to keep their skills up to date. And also on the horizon is a simulator and operations training. We're looking at potentially 2020 to 2021, and this has proven to be an extremely successful function of operations training at other locations throughout the nation, and we're just in our discovery phase for this potential simulator coming to light rail. We currently have a relief instructor program in our operations training that works extremely well. I have 2 main instructors and then 5 relief instructors. I'm looking to create a relief instructor program within systems, maintenance, and operations in the RCC portion. And that will, what I really care about is developing my staff, and that will give them some opportunities to develop as trainers and move up through the ranks into positions such as instructor and training supervisors across the board at light rail. And then, last but not least, we're in our discovery phase and research phase of an in-house apprenticeship program that can work alongside MTT and also create some highly skilled technicians and staff that we need going forward. Any questions for me?
Are there questions for the planning? Councilmember Lutz. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I'm curious, is the path to being a light rail operator, do they come from being a bus driver first?
They do, yes.
And is the skill transferable?
Absolutely, yes, thank you. And Madam Chair and committee members, absolutely. It's a wonderful opportunity for the operators to continue their career in a different capacity. When a bus operator applies, they go through an application and interview process, agility testing, and then my staff step in and provide up to 10 weeks of training. And it's in classroom, in the field, and in the yard, in all the different capacities of safety-oriented training that creates safely operating operators that can go out and work either line, and we really have not much turnover. So it's really a great opportunity for people to just continue and develop their career if they choose to. It's a much different environment than bus. There's a little bit difference of interaction with the public and things like that, but absolutely there's a definite advancement there and a skill transfer there. So.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Do committee members have any announcements or other questions? Otherwise, we can be adjourned. Thank you. My apologies again for being late.